My daughter called me at 7:43 in the morning on a Tuesday in March, and the first thing I heard wasn't her voice. It was silence. The kind that comes after crying when a person has wrung themselves out and what's left is just air and nothing. "Dad," she finally said, "I don't know what to do." I already knew. I'd known for 14 months. My name is Arthur Dempsey. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years with the city of Ottawa as a civil infrastructure planner, and I raised 2 children more or less on my own after my wife Lorena passed from a brain aneurysm when our daughter Meg was 9 and our son was 14. I'm telling you that not for sympathy, but because it matters to the shape of the man I became. When you lose someone that fast, with no warning, no illness to prepare you, you learn early that the ground beneath you is not as solid as it looks. You learn to watch for cracks before they open. So when my daughter Meg married into the Caldwell family 6 years ago, I watched. And I saw what she couldn't. Meg is the kind of person who remembers your coffee order from a conversation you had 2 years prior. She teaches kindergarten in Canada, and she chose that on purpose. The way people choose things that ask everything of them, and give back in a currency that doesn't deposit anywhere. She married a man named Jonah Caldwell because she loved the way he listened, the way he'd turn his whole body toward you when you were talking, like you were the only signal worth receiving. I believe he loved her. I still believe that. I want to be clear about it because it matters to everything that comes after. His mother is a woman named Cecily Caldwell. If you live anywhere near the Glebe or Westboro, you may know the name from the Caldwell Group, a property development firm that Cecily built from her late husband's small contracting company into something with 3 times the footprint and half the warmth. She's on 2 charitable boards, gets quoted in the Ottawa Business Journal twice a year, and has the kind of measured friendliness that you confuse for warmth until you realize you've never once heard her laugh at anything she didn't plan. I met her at the engagement dinner Jonah organized at a restaurant on Elgin Street. She arrived 7 minutes late, apologized without meaning it, and spent the first 20 minutes asking Meg questions that were shaped like compliments but landed like assessments. "What school did you go to? How long have you been at that board?" "Oh, kindergarten. That must be so rewarding." She held the word rewarding just a fraction of a second too long, the way you hold something before you set it back down on a shelf that wasn't yours to begin with. After dinner, she touched my arm near the door and said, "Arthur, I'm so glad Jonah has found someone stable." She smiled. I smiled. I drove home in the quiet and I thought about the word stable. The slight weight she'd put on the second syllable, the way it sounded less like a compliment, and more like a ceiling she was quietly measuring Meg against. I made myself a cup of tea when I got in, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote the date on the inside cover of a fresh notebook. That was the first entry. They married the following September at the Caldwell property on the Rado Lake, 200 guests, a tent that probably cost more than my first mortgage. Cecily gave a toast about the importance of family legacy, and the strength that came from knowing where you came from. It was gracious and composed, and it never once mentioned Meg by name. Just our new addition. Like a room that had been annexed into an existing floor plan. Jonah took a position at the Caldwell Group 6 weeks after the wedding. It wasn't his idea, or if it was, it wasn't originally. Meg mentioned to me that Cecily had brought it up at a family dinner, framed as an opportunity, a chance for Jonah to really build something lasting instead of the project management work he'd been doing for a mid-sized firm downtown. The salary was nearly double. Meg said Jonah seemed excited. She seemed quieter about it than he did. He moved into an office on the 4th floor of the Caldwell building on Bank Street. Nice view. No contract that anyone had reviewed. It was my neighbor Gord, who said the thing that stuck with me. Not because he's a lawyer, he isn't, but because he spent 20 years in commercial real estate before he retired, and he knows how these structures work from the inside. We were on his back deck on a Saturday morning in November. First snow of the year, still sitting on the deck rails, and I was thinking out loud the way you do with someone who won't repeat it. Gord set down his mug and looked at me sideways. "Is Jonah on any of the property titles?" he asked. I didn't know. I called Meg the next day and asked like it was idle conversation. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said she'd assumed the condo they were living in. The one Cecily had said was theirs as a wedding gift was in both their names. It wasn't. Gord looked at me the next morning over the fence with an expression that didn't need any words underneath it. "I want to stop here and say something directly to you, because I think you need to hear it. If you've ever stood far enough back to see the whole picture while someone you love is still standing in the middle of it, then you know what I'm describing. You can't tell them. Not yet. Not without proof. And not without understanding that they will defend the very thing that's about to hurt them. Because at that point it still looks like love from where they're standing. So you carry it. You carry it and you keep watching, and you take very careful notes." 5 months after I started that notebook, Meg came to my house on a Wednesday afternoon without calling first. She sat in the kitchen the same way she used to as a teenager when something had gone sideways at school, elbows on the table, staring at the grain of the wood. I made her tea without asking. Cecily and I had a disagreement, she said. I asked what about. About Leela. Leela is my granddaughter. She was 2 years and 4 months old that Wednesday, and she had at that point her father's dark eyes and a habit of narrating everything she ate while she ate it. Leela blueberry, Leela more blueberry. Meg said that Cecily had been making comments about the daycare. The one they'd chosen together near their home in Hintonburg. A small bilingual program that Meg loved, because the teachers knew every child's name in both official languages by the end of the first week. Cecily felt it wasn't the right fit. She'd identified a program in Rockcliffe Park, more structured, better networks. Leela should be around children who are going somewhere, she'd said, and then laughed as though it were a joke. Meg had pushed back. Jonah had stayed quiet. I looked at my daughter across the table. I asked what Jonah said afterward when it was just the two of them. She looked into her mug. He said his mother means well. I nodded. I said nothing. But that night, after she'd gone home, I picked up the phone and called a woman I'd worked with at the city for 11 years before she left to go into family and estate law. Her name is Susan Fairweather, and she is one of the sharpest minds I know. I told her I needed a consultation. I told her it was for my daughter, but I wasn't ready to bring my daughter in yet. Susan met me on a Thursday at her office on Metcalf Street. I brought the notebook. I brought what I knew about the condo title, the employment arrangement, and the original copy of a document Meg had forwarded me the previous summer without thinking much of it. A financial agreement Cecily had asked them both to sign when Jonah joined the company. Something about protecting the family business in case of, as Cecily had put it, any unexpected life changes. Susan read it carefully. She asked me once to clarify a date, then she set it down. This agreement, as written, she said, means that Jonah's share of any appreciation on the condo, which is technically a Caldwell Group asset, reverts to the company in the event of separation, death, or voluntary departure from the firm. She paused. It also means that if Jonah leaves or is let go, the condo goes with it. I asked if that was legal. It's structured to look like a gift and function like a lien, she said. I'd need to dig further. But I can tell you this, if that document was signed without independent legal counsel, there are grounds. I asked if she'd been retained by other people in similar situations with this family. She gave me a look that, in the context of solicitor-client privilege, said more than words could. I hired a man named Curtis Webb. He came recommended by Susan. No connection to the Caldwells, no shared clients, an office in Barhaven that looked like it had been decorated sometime in 2003, and hadn't needed updating since because the work spoke well enough for itself. Curtis was 51, quiet, and the kind of methodical that makes opposing counsel nervous. Over the next 8 months, Curtis and I built a file. I paid for it out of savings I'd been stacking since Lorena died, money I'd always intended for the kids eventually anyway. Curtis found that the condo had never been transferred out of a numbered company Cecily controlled. He found that Jonah's role at the Caldwell Group had no written employment contract, that he'd been classified in the company structure in a way that gave him none of the protections the Ontario Employment Standards Act would otherwise provide. He found a former Caldwell employee named Terry, a site project manager who had worked for the company for 9 years before Cecily terminated his arrangement in a way that left him with no severance and no recourse, because there was no contract that said otherwise. Terry answered my call on a Thursday evening in January. He was quiet for a moment after I explained who I was. Then he said something I wrote down and kept. She's very good at making you feel like your family right up until the moment she needs you to not be. There was one more thing. And this is the part that I have not told many people, because it is the part that changed the nature of what I was doing from documentation into something that required a kind of stillness I'm not sure I had before this. In the course of his work, Curtis spoke to a former Caldwell Group accountant who had left the company the previous year under circumstances she described as a mutual decision that was entirely not mutual. She was careful about what she shared, but she told Curtis one thing that I needed to understand fully. She told him that approximately 18 months before Jonah and Meg's wedding, Cecily had transferred the majority of her personal assets, including the Rideau Lake property and the flagship holdings, into a family trust structured such that Jonah's share, his actual inheritance from his own family's company, was discretionary, meaning Cecily retained full control of whether he ever saw a dollar of it. The house, the job, the future, all of it borrowed, all of it held in his mother's hands. I sat with that for 2 days. Then I finished building. I want to say something honest here, because I think you deserve it. There were nights in those 14 months where I sat at my kitchen table at midnight, asking myself whether I was protecting my daughter or whether I was just a 63-year-old man with a notebook and a grievance, playing at something I had no business being in. I thought about calling Meg and telling her everything. I thought about it every week. What stopped me every time wasn't strategy. It was her face. The way she had looked the morning after Lorena died, sitting on the edge of her bed, 9 years old, not crying, just trying to understand something too large for the container she had. I had not been able to take that pain out of her hands then, but I had been able to stand between her and every subsequent thing until she was steady enough to stand on her own. I was not going to stop now because it was inconvenient or because I was tired. So I waited, and I kept the notebook, and I trusted that the morning would come. It came on a Tuesday. Meg called at 7:43. I already told you that. What I didn't tell you is that Jonah had left for work that morning and found his key card wouldn't open the parking garage. He'd called upstairs and been told that his access had been suspended pending a review of his role within the organization. He'd driven home to find Meg on the phone with him, and while they were talking, a letter had arrived by courier. Not email, courier. The kind of thing designed to feel official and final, informing them that the condo would need to be vacated within 30 days as the property was required for corporate purposes. 30 days, with a 2-year-old. Meg was sitting on the kitchen floor of that condo when she called me. I know because I heard Lila in the background asking for her juice, and Meg's voice had the specific flatness of a person who is holding themselves together, for the sake of the small person in the room who cannot yet understand why the air feels wrong. "Dad, I don't know what to do," she said. "I do," I said. "Call me back from somewhere, Lila can't hear you." She called from the hallway bathroom 4 minutes later. "Jonah has a lawyer," I told her. "Her name is Susan Fairweather. Her number is in my email. I'm forwarding it to you right now." Silence. "Dad, how do you have a lawyer for Jonah?" "Because I've been watching for 14 months, I said. "And I need you to trust me for a little bit longer." "Not long, but a little longer. Can you do that?" A pause, and then quietly. "What did you find?" I told her to come to my house. I told her to bring Lila and a bag for a few nights. And I told her that I would tell her everything at my kitchen table with the tea on and the door shut, and that by the end of it she would understand every decision I'd made, and she could be as angry with me as she needed to be once she'd heard it all. She arrived 2 hours later. Lila had fallen asleep in the car seat. I carried her inside and put her on the couch with the quilt my wife had made before she got sick, and I sat across from my daughter, and I started at the beginning. I showed her the notebook. I showed her the condo title. I showed her the financial agreement she'd signed and what Susan said it actually meant. I told her about Terry. I told her about the family trust and what it meant for Jonah's future in his own family's company if he stayed. I set each folder down one at a time and let her read. She read in silence for a long time. Meg does that. She goes quiet when the information is serious, sorts it all the way down before she says anything. It's one of the things I respect most about her, and it used to terrify me when she was 17. When she was done, she looked up. Her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady. "Does Jonah know any of this?" "Not the full picture," I said. "Cecily's system depends on the people inside it not having the full picture." She nodded slowly. "She was going to let us think we owned that place for years," Meg said. "It wasn't quite a question. Until it was useful for her not to," I said. Meg was quiet again. Then she said, "Jonah loves his mother." I said I knew. "This is going to break something between them," she said. "Something was already broken," I said. "He just didn't know the name of it yet." The next morning, Jonah came to my house. He sat at the same kitchen table, in the same chair. Meg sat beside him. He looked like a man who had been awake for a long time trying to locate the floor. I put coffee in front of him and I let him sit in it until he was ready. Then I walked him through everything, same as I had with Meg. He didn't say much for the first 20 minutes. When I got to the trust structure, the part that explained that his role in his family's company had never been guaranteed, that his mother held complete discretion over whether he ever received what any reasonable person would consider his inheritance. He looked at the paper for a long time without speaking. "She told me it was for tax purposes," he said finally. "She told me it protected the business." "It does," I said. "It protects her control of the business. That's what it does." He pressed his hands flat on the table, fingers spread the way a person does when they're trying to feel something solid. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. And then he looked at Meg, and she looked back at him, and I got up and went to refill my coffee because some moments require a witness to leave the room. Susan filed the first documents the following Monday. The foundation was this. The condo had been represented to Jonah and Meg as a gift, acted upon in reliance, and the failure to transfer title while simultaneously including a reversion clause in a separately signed agreement constituted a legal position Susan described, in terms I could actually follow, as not going to hold up. Ontario law on unjust enrichment is particular, and the Caldwell Group's structure, which had looked airtight from the inside, had not anticipated someone spending 14 months learning where all the seams were. Terry came forward formally with records. He'd kept everything in a filing box in his garage in Orleans, and he handed it to Curtis on a Wednesday afternoon without hesitation. His documentation mirrored what had been done to Jonah closely enough that it established something lawyers call pattern evidence, which sounds academic until you understand what it means. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a method. The former accountant provided a statutory declaration. She was careful and precise, and she only said what she could directly substantiate. But what she could directly substantiate was enough. Cecily Caldwell's legal team responded within 48 hours. They were competent and expensive, and they had clearly prepared for some version of this, the kind of fringe legal challenge a disgruntled former employee might mount. What they had not prepared for was a retired city planner who had spent 14 months building a complete structural assessment of their clients' arrangements, and had enough documentation to fill 2 binders. And then there was Jonah. This is the part I want you to slow down for, because it is the part I am most proud of and most humbled by, in equal measure. Jonah called Cecily the Thursday after the filing. I don't know what he said because I wasn't there and he hasn't shared the full detail, nor should he have to. What I know is that Meg told me he was on the phone for 47 minutes, and that when he came back into the room his face was the face of a man who had said something that could not be said, and had decided that was all right. He didn't cut his mother off. That is not who Jonah is. But he told her, Meg said, that he was no longer going to act as though he didn't understand what had been done. That he loved her. That he also loved his wife and his daughter. And that going forward those were not going to be in competition with each other. Cecily did not respond well to that. But here is the thing about a structure that relies on everyone inside it, not fully understanding how it works. The moment one person understands, the whole load redistributes. Cecily had spent 25 years building something that depended on Jonah not knowing the weight he was actually carrying. Once he knew, she couldn't unknow it for him. The settlement took 5 months. I won't itemize it because some of it is confidential and some of it simply isn't the point. What matters is what changed. The condo was transferred into Jonah and Meg's names, outright, with no encumbrances. The financial agreement they had signed was voided. Jonah negotiated a formal employment contract with the Caldwell Group. Or, when Cecily declined those terms, he walked out with a package that Curtis described as reflecting the actual years of contribution he'd made, rather than the phantom arrangement that had existed on paper. He has a different job now, with a firm in Nepean that does exactly what he's good at and pays him to know it. He came home the night he signed the offer and made dinner, the good chicken thing he does with the lemon and capers, and the 3 of them ate at their own kitchen table in their own home, and Lila sat in her chair narrating every bite. Cecily did not lose everything. I want to be honest about that because I think you deserve an honest ending. She is still a successful woman, and she will likely die one. What she lost was more particular. 2 of her long-standing development partners, once they understood the full scope of what had been documented, chose not to renew. A project she had been positioning for a federal heritage designation moved forward with a different lead. The Caldwell name still opens certain doors. It opens fewer of them, and the ones it opens aren't always the ones she wanted. I'll take that. I will take that and sleep soundly. Here is what I learned, and I want to say it plainly. There are people who use generosity the way a contractor uses load-bearing walls. Not to support you, but to control what you can build around them. They give you the house, they keep the deed, they give you the job, they never write it down. And every Christmas, every birthday, every time you try to push back about something small, they gesture at everything they've provided, and the gesture means, you wouldn't want to lose all this. Would you? The thing most people don't understand about that kind of arrangement is that you don't have to accept it. But you have to know what it is first. And the people running it are counting on you not looking. So here is the practical thing. The thing you can do today right now before you close this. If someone has given you a home, a parent, an in-law, a business partner, look at the deed, actually look at it. If someone has given you a job within a family enterprise, find out if there is a real contract, one that was reviewed by someone whose loyalty is only to you. Love does not make paperwork unnecessary. The people who tell you not to worry about paperwork are often the people who have read it very carefully themselves. And here is the question I want you to sit with after you close this. If everything you believed you owned turned out to be held in someone else's name, would you know? And how long would it take before you found out? I'll tell you something true. Lila turned 3 in February. She had her birthday here at this house because Meg wanted her to have it somewhere that felt like just theirs for the day. I made the cake, chocolate, her request, specific and non-negotiable. And I may have used too much icing, and I do not regret it even slightly. At some point in the afternoon she climbed up onto my lap, picked up a plastic tiara left over from the party supplies, and placed it very deliberately on my head, then looked at me to see what I would do. I told her I was the king of the kitchen, and that my kingdom had excellent cake. She thought about this seriously, and then agreed. Jonah stood in the doorway with his coffee, watching. He looked like a man working through something that no longer hurt the same way it used to, settling into the new shape of things. His eyes were clearer than I had seen them in a long time. I know I kept things from my daughter for 14 months. I have asked myself more than once whether I had the right to do that. I don't have a clean answer, and I'm not going to pretend I do. What I know is that if I had told her early, she'd have gone to Jonah from fear, he'd have gone to his mother from love, and Cecily would have had a composed and polished response ready before any of them sat back down. I had watched that woman operate. She was never without a prepared position. I needed her without one, and that required time and silence and the discipline to hold a plan steady while everything in me wanted to just tell my daughter the truth. Was that right? I honestly don't know. It was necessary. Those two things are not always the same. Before I let you go, I want to hear from you, because I read every comment and your responses are the reason I keep coming back to tell these. Tell me honestly, do you think I was right to keep Meg in the dark while I built all of this? Comment 1 if you think a father protecting his child in silence made the right call. Comment 2 if you think she deserved to know the moment I knew. And comment 3 if you're somewhere in the middle and still turning it over. Because that's where I live most days, and you're welcome to it. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always want to know how far these stories travel. If any part of this reached you, if you've ever had someone with money or power quietly arrange your life into something that served them, tell me about it below. You are not alone in that. Not even close. If this story meant something to you, do me one small kindness before you go and subscribe. It's just me trying to tell the truth about things that happened, and every subscriber keeps that possible. I'm glad you're here. There are more stories coming, and I'd like you here for them.